Today's commentary is about Bhagavad Gita Chapter 2, verses 54 to 72. Michelangelo said that inside every block of stone dwells a beautiful statue. The Bhagavad Gita is a divine song that helps unravel the beauty within you. It helps you discover the magic potency of self-governance. It enriches you from within. Carl Jung said, "Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes." The world converges to that rare person who has empowered himself and tapped his inner resources. Such a person achieves success effortlessly. He is happy and evolves to his full potential. Without cultivating your inner resources, you feel inadequate, incomplete. It is only with inner unfoldment that you experience true power. You are not the human being going through a spiritual experience. You are the very spirit. The Gita brings you back to the cognition of your true potential. You become a perfect person. Arjuna's question and Krishna's answer. Many of us have a vague concept of perfection. Bhagavad Gita Chapter 2, verses 54 to 72 gives a definition of the perfect person and also outlines the path to perfection. Arjuna's question is, what is the nature of an enlightened person? How does the infinite express through a finite form? Krishna's brilliant explanation is a guide to mankind for all time, a clear picture of that exalted state of enlightenment depicted in terms we understand. This is one of the most popular portions of the Bhagavad Gita. In fact, this is where the Gita really begins. The first chapter and initial 10 verses of the second chapter detail Arjuna's dilemma, grief, and ultimate breakdown. It is only when he completely surrenders to Krishna and seeks his guidance that Krishna speaks. In verses 11 to 53 of chapter 2, however, gives the highest philosophy, more therapeutic than educative. They are designed to shake Arjuna out of his stupor and make him more receptive to the knowledge that follows. It is also an assurance to Arjuna that Krishna is not only a friend willing to help in a crisis, he is more, far more. Krishna has the awesome wisdom to lead Arjuna out of delusion and inaction to the pinnacle of perfection. Arjuna shows signs of partial awakening when he asks a question in verse 54. Nevertheless, Krishna meticulously completes the answers to that question. By this time, Arjuna's recovery is complete. Verse 54. Arjuna uvacha sthitaprajnasya ka bhasha samadhistasya keshava sthitadih kim prabhasheta kimasita vrajeta kim. O Keshava, what is the definition of a sthita prajna, one established in wisdom, absorbed in samadhi, meditation? How does one rooted in wisdom speak, sit, and walk? We all look for role models, someone to look up to emulate, someone who has walked the path before us, someone who has made it in life. In today's world, the role models seem to be the rich and famous. In contrast, Arjuna understands that it is only internal enrichment that makes for true success. Therefore, he asks for the definition of a perfect person. Most of us have either a hazy or distorted idea of perfection. Externally, you may not be able to tell a perfect person from the rest of humanity. But there is a world of difference internally. We have no access to his inner state and make the mistake of assessing him by superfluous parameters. Consequently, we go completely wrong conferring divinity on ordinary people and ascribing mediocrity to outstanding sages. We lead ourselves up the garden path. Hence, it is imperative to have an accurate benchmark of perfection. So, we know which direction to move in and which role model to emulate. Arjuna is confused. Realized persons across time have exhibited various characteristics. Some were gregarious, while others lived as recluses. Some enjoyed lavish lifestyles, while others thrived on austerity. Arjuna is not sure what makes for perfection and which of the external expressions he should follow. Arjuna's questions consist of four parts. Ka Basha, what is the profile of a perfect person? Kim Asita, how does he sit? What goes on inside of him? What is it that sets the perfect one apart from the rest of us? In questions 1 and 2, Arjuna wants an insight into the inner personality of a realized person. What makes him tick? How does it feel to break free from all limitations and live in the state of infinity? Kim Prabhashete. How does he speak? Speech is a metonym indicating all organs of action. How does he act? Kim Brajeta. How does he walk? How does he connect with the world? Here, Arjuna asks, how does his inner revelation impact on his interaction with the world? How does he network with the world? Having reached the infinite status, how does he reconcile it with the finitude of the world? Hence, it is a complete question seeking the illustration of a person of excellence. The subsequent verses communicate the depth of the human personality, incomprehensible to the common man. Yet, the masterly presentation is such that anyone can understand, relate to, and strive to emulate. Arjuna asks Krishna about the highest level of perfection in a human being. In the next verse, Krishna gives the definition of a realized person. In verses 56 to 59, he expounds on the definition with greater descriptive clarity. In verse 60, he talks about how the powerful senses attack the mind and lead it astray. In verses 61 to 66, he gives the pivotal role of the intellect. In 67, he says that the mind, which has been misled by the senses, drags the intellect away. And when your intellect goes, he emphatically says, you perish. In verse 68, he says only a person who has controlled the senses qualifies to be a sthita prajna. Verses 69 to 72 bring out the conclusion. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Prajahati Yadha Kaman Sarvan Partha Manogatan Atmanyevatmana Tushtaha Sthita Prajnastadochyate. The blessed Lord said, O Partha, when all desires of the mind are totally abandoned and one is fulfilled in the self, alone by the self, then one is said to be a sthita prajna, one established in wisdom. Partha is another name for Arjuna, meaning son of Pritha, Kunti. Throughout the Bhagavad Gita, both Krishna and Arjuna address each other by various names. Apart from lending a poetic charm to the text, it indicates the tremendous love they have for each other. This is essential for any communication, especially spiritual. Subtle abstract concepts are understood better when there is affection and confidence between the teacher and student. Here, Krishna gives two attributes that make for perfection, irrespective of one's lifestyle, race, or nationality. As long as one develops these attributes, one is a sthita prajna. The qualifications are given in the positive as well as in the negative. He first gives the negative aspect because it is easier to understand. A person of steady wisdom is one who totally abandons all desires from the mind. That sounds frightening to us. Then Krishna follows it up with a positive assertion to complete the picture. He has no desires because he is fulfilled in the self alone, by the self. Self means Atman. Atman is the absolute state of Godhood. When you have access to your own infinite status, everything else pales into significance. The value of all finite things instantly comes down to zero. He is giving us a definition in the absolute. It is impossible to understand the absolute, hence, we must come down to our level, understand its meaning with reference to our life, and then extrapolate to understand what he is talking about. Krishna is referring to growth, the escalation from one state of preoccupation to another. We have all been through some form of growth. Today, you are an adult, but at some point of time, you were a child. From childhood till adulthood, you went through various stages of development. At each stage, you were gripped with desires pertaining to that level. For example, as an infant, your whole life revolved around your mother. As a toddler, toys were your world. Then you encountered the thrill of computer games and got hooked onto the computer. You were graciously given the toys and you gave it to your younger brother, who was bowled over by your sense of renunciation. And one fine day, you found computer games also didn't enthrall you. Why? You'd fallen in love, thus you grew into a full-fledged adult. Now you are engrossed in adult attractions, career, family, home. This is how you escalate to higher desires. When you are captivated by a higher interest, your previous desires fade away. Having reached adulthood, all you want to do is maintain status quo. But there are miles to go. If you can visualize something beyond what the world has to offer you, gain that perspective which will motivate you to move even higher. This is portrayed in Plato's metaphor. A community of people lives in a cave for generations. A smart young man from among them once gets inspired and tells the others, "Look, there must be something beyond this cave. The whole universe cannot be just this little dwelling place. Let us explore." The others have never considered this possibility and are unwilling to accommodate the thought. So they dissuade him from pursuing with the matter. Confused but obedient, he follows their advice. But after a few days, that restlessness again arises within him. He is now convinced that there must be something beyond the cave, and he knows that nobody else shares his view. So he decides to explore. He sets out by himself. Soon he finds he is in total darkness. He no longer has the comforting light of the settlement. He has not reached the mouth of the cave either. He's neither here nor there. Now that's a frightening condition to be in, but his conviction that there has to be a world beyond the cave keeps him going. He walks on until he sees a faint light glimmering in the distance. This is the new world beckoning him. His confidence grows and he continues his pursuit with renewed vigor. He finally reaches the mouth of the cave. He comes out into the open and experiences the magnificent world he takes for granted. The brilliant sun, the refreshing water, the gentle breeze, the infinite expanse of sky and sea, the majestic mountains, the breathtaking splash of colors, the mind blowing variety of flowers and fruits, birds and beasts. He is overwhelmed with joy. He basks in his newfound experience for a couple of days. Then he thinks of his family and community in the cave. He decides to go back and bring them out. He goes with enthusiasm. He is elated since he has experienced the truth and cannot wait to share with the others. Back in the cave, he speaks with greater conviction. He describes the beautiful world out there. How do you think his elders react? They look at each other and say, "We always knew there was something not quite right with him," because he speaks a language they do not understand. When he describes the sun and stars, they have no idea what he is talking about, so they think he is mad. Plato beautifully captures the essence of the spiritual journey in this metaphor. There is that inner call of the divine in all of us, which tells us that there has to be something beyond the life we know. And there is this exploratory spirit in us. When you embark on this journey, you find that nobody is with you. People mock you for your convictions and sometimes act as hindrances in your path to discovering the truth. They think that you are lost when in fact they are the ones who are lost. Once you are able to pursue the truth alone, you reach a state where you are out of sync with other people, but you have not yet experienced the higher. You can no longer be content with worldly pleasures, but you have no access to spiritual joys. You are in no man's land. However, you must persevere nevertheless. Then you get an indication that you are on the right track. Things start going right in your life. You gain the unshakable confidence that you are on the right path. With this renewed conviction, you continue till you reach realization. In India, a great seer has emerged in each generation to speak to us the new world, the experience of the fourth plane of consciousness. But since we do not understand, we wonder what he is speaking of. Why should he come back and speak to us? He has no other intention but to share the bliss and serenity of his experience. He tells us the truth. Initially, you may not comprehend the message of the scriptures, but over time, you realize its veracity. This is the Guru Shishya Parampara, the mentor protege lineage which has continued from beginning of time. Spiritual evolution must be gradual. When you are full of desires, you cannot suddenly drop them. In fact, you cannot drop desires at all. When you can do is learn to appreciate something of greater value, something more fulfilling than what you are engaged in right now. Make an intelligent evaluation of the pleasures available to you. Understand that there are subtler aspects within which give farther greater happiness. Then you will no longer be swayed by the lower joys. If you are at the physical level, try and move up to the emotional plane. Once you taste the joy of emotional gratification, your own erstwhile physical pleasures seem trivial. Escalate to an intellectual goal, and even emotional joys fade into insignificance. Finally, when the lure of the infinite grips you, nothing in the world will ensnare you. All finite joys lose their luster in the brilliance of the infinite, just as floodlights in a cricket stadium are insignificant in the glare of the midnight sun. This is the positive aspect of the definition of a realized soul. If Krishna had not given this, it would have misled us. If he had said, When one completely abandons all desires of the mind, then one is a realized soul. All of humanity would qualify in deep sleep because there are no desires in deep sleep. But that is not realization, because in that state you have no knowledge of the self or Atman. You must qualify both in the negative and the positive aspects. When all desires of the mind are totally relinquished as a result of being satisfied in the self, then one is said to be rooted in wisdom. Growth takes place in every aspect. In plants, the sap flows up in one direction. Blood pumped by the heart cannot return because of the one-way system of valves in the arteries. Similarly, in the systole and diastole of life, once you leave an abyss, there is no return. We are compelled to obey life's forward impulse. Growth escalation is unidirectional. The Gita gives you this assurance: Yad gatva na nivartante. Once you get to the highest level, you do not regress to the previous stage. Here in verse 55, he gives the definition of a self realized person. This is explained in Braharanayaka Upanishad in three words: Aptakama, Atmakama, Akama. Aptakama means all desires are fulfilled. This happens when you have Atmakama, the desire for Atman. The lure of the infinite neutralizes all worldly desires. Then you go to the state of Akama, desirelessness. This is realization. Dukkeshvanuddvignamanaha Sukeshu vigatasprihah Vitaragabhayakrodah Stitadirmuniruchyate. One is said to be a Muni, sage, rooted in wisdom when one's mind is not perturbed by sorrow, nor does one yearn for joy. One is free from desire, free from fear, and free from anger. Two significant words used here are Sthitadi and Muni. Sthitadi is one of steady intellect. Muni means a contemplator, visionary, thinker. A combination of these two is essential for all development, material or spiritual. Krishna answers the question: how does he sit? What is the inner profile of the person of realization? He refers to two things. One is that the mind is not affected by joy or sorrow emanating from within. Many a time you may find that even while sitting alone, you feel extremely happy and elated. Yet, at other times, there may be sadness within you for no discernible reason. These are various mood fluctuations within. They are a result of the quality of actions you have performed in the past. If in the past you have been engaged in unselfish, dedicated actions, your mood will be good. But if you have been selfish and negative, then you will go through the lows of life. The problem does not lie in the joy or sorrow, it is in the affectation. Everyone goes through happiness and sadness. They are an inevitable part of your life. You cannot have one without the other. Pairs of opposites are inherent in the world, in your mind, but you need not be affected by them. People of Mumbai will be able to understand this concept from a simple analogy. Bhel is a popular snack unique to Mumbai. It is a wonderful mix of different tastes. It is spicy as well as sweet, crisp as well as moist, salty and sour at the same time. What a unique combination of pairs of opposites. And it is the combination of opposites that make it so enjoyable. You must know how to enjoy the bale. Foreigners are not used to this assault on their taste buds. and ask for sweet bale. The bale of life is a mixture of various flavors, different emotions. Relish the flavors of life well, but do not get moved by them. Remain an unattached spectator. Then you enjoy the fluctuations of joy and sorrow that come your way. In the game of life, the world is your adversary. To win, you must know the rules of the game and assess the opponent. The world is a sea of change. The Sanskrit word for world is samsara, that which changes, comes, and goes. To add, so your woes, the changing world is immune to your control. So you must learn to face the euphoric highs as well as the dismal lows with balance. Accept the world as it is and do not expect any assured pattern. Life is a high risk venture. You cannot depend on the vagaries of the world. Otherwise, you become a poor loser in the game you have chosen to play. This does not mean that a perfect person is indifferent. A plant demonstrates no emotion. An animal, on the other hand, displays emotion but is swayed by it, and it has no choice but to act on it. Even a well trained dog will go into a joyful frenzy when its master returns after a long absence, and it will be miserable, sometimes even die when abandoned. As a human being, you have the unique capacity to feel deep emotion, at the same time, remain unaffected by it. You act on the sane counsel of the intellect. The second thing he speaks of is freedom from desire, fear, and anger. How does desire come? You think of food only on an empty stomach. When you've had a heavy meal, the thought of food doesn't enter your mind. Even if someone offers you your favorite dish, you decline. So the fact that you are plagued by desire implies an emptiness within. Desire emanates from a deficiency. This feeling of deficiency haunts everyone, every moment of one's life. The Bhagavad Gita says that this feeling of emptiness is imaginary. You are not empty at all. You are full, whole, and complete, totally fulfilled. But for some strange, inexplicable reason, you do not know it. And it is this ignorance that is the cause of the whole problem. All your desires spring from the fundamental ignorance of your own completeness. This ignorance is the fertile breeding ground of desire. So when Krishna says a realized soul is free from desire, he means he is free from the feeling of emptiness. He has come to understand that he is in fact whole, full. This is the state of realization. Fear and anger are aberrations of desire. Gratification of desire gives rise to fear of losing what you have acquired, and desire obstructed creates anger. For instance, when you acquire a great deal of wealth and the desire for money is satiated, there is fear that someone will take it away, a thief, the government, or perhaps even your spouse. And if you're not able to earn the money, there is anger towards the obstruction that prevents you from making the money. When you are free from desire, you are automatically free from fear and anger. The clue here is that if you have a tendency to be fearful or angry, it means there are a lot of desires at play. Anger and fear cannot arise without an underlying desire. You need to analyze what you have a desire for and deal with the root of the problem. Then fear and anger will automatically go. Any other method of dealing with these emotions without tackling their root cause, desire, will prove ineffective. Until such time that you gain the knowledge to conquer desire, fear, and anger, the Gita recommends their management and containment. This is done with the intellect. When the intellect disciplines and directs desires, it becomes far less virulent. Uncontrolled desire is like a deadly virus which devastates and kills. Controlled desire is like the vaccine of the same virus which protects you from infection. It transforms into a goal which triggers achievement and progress in the world. The intellect removes irrational fears through analysis and redeploys anger against evil and injustice. Thus, even before you gain knowledge of the self, you're relatively free from the ill effects of desire and its aberrations, fear, and anger. The intellect of a person of steady wisdom is fixed in the truth of his fullness. When desire starts bothering you, if you powerfully suggest to yourself that you are whole and that you really do not need this fulfillment, it gives temporary relief. But if you were to gain complete knowledge of your fullness, how wonderfully free you would be. Yes, sarvatrana ततत्प्राप्य शुभाशुभम् नाभिनन्दति न द्वेष्टि तस्य प्रज्ञा प्रतिष्ठिता. One is established in wisdom when one is everywhere, unattached, neither elated at obtaining good nor vexed with evil. In this verse, he answers the question, how does he walk? Kim Vrajeta, meaning, how does he interact with the world? You might wonder after having read the earlier verses, is a realized person like a piece of stone? What happens to a stone? When it is kicked around or worshipped, the stone is indifferent. You might feel that a realized person is like that. He elucidates this by saying, Yas Sarvatra. Ya means any individual. The Gita is an all encompassing science of perfection applicable to all human beings at all times. It is not the exclusive domain of Brahmanas, Hindus, or even Indians. Sarvatra means everywhere. He is on the move, energetic, an epitome of dynamism. He has not withdrawn into seclusion. Then he puts in a word which sets him apart from the rest of us. Anabhishma, anabhisneha, unattached. This is the difference between realized person and the others. He has mastered the art of maintaining physical contact with the world while remaining mentally detached. Whereas you fluctuate between indifference and attachment, there is a third option which you do not know of, which remains unexplored, wholehearted participation in worldly activities with total inner detachment. This is demonstrated by the innovation of the post-it note. Its unique feature is that it sticks as long as you want it to stick, and it detaches itself without tearing when you no longer need it. An unattached person is exactly like that. He gives himself completely to relationships at home, at work, and in society. But when the time comes to part, he exits gracefully without heartache or turmoil. A young man is happy by himself. Then he meets the woman of his dreams. Through constant thinking, he gets attached to her. Thereafter, when she is away, he is miserable. His happiness hinges on her presence. This is attachment. Thus, you get attached to various things and people. You cannot move without them. You need an entire entourage wherever you go. You lose your freedom. There are two problems with attachment. One, you are unhappy even when the contact remains. And two, you lose the object you are attached to. This is the law, emphatically presented. A typical example of this is a mother with her child. If she is attached to the child, she is in a state of constant anxiety, torment, and paranoia, even when things are all right. If the child so much as sneezes, she imagines he is getting pneumonia. Every stage of the child's life is traumatic. As a result, the child, who is supposed to be a source of joy and happiness to the mother, in effect, gives only sorrow, and the irony is that everyone else enjoys the child. When she continues like this, it results in a negative relationship. The child becomes averse to the mother's mollycoddling. All this is a result of attachment, which is nothing but self love, and any selfishness is repulsive. A miser is attached to his wealth. He suffers as a result of that attachment and loses the wealth in the end. Therefore, Krishna implores you not to get attached. He does not say you should not contact the world. By all means, have the world, but without attachment. Only then can you enjoy what you have acquired. The majority of people fluctuate between two categories: those who contact the world with attachment and suffer, and those who physically keep away from the world in the guise of spirituality and suffer. The latter suffer because they deny themselves things that they are still attached to. Attachment has no connection with physical contact. It is mental dependence. So, to remain detached, you do not have to sever relationships or physically remove yourself from a person or object. All you need to do is retain your inner independence. When your happiness is not dependent on any object or being, you are detached. And detachment can come only when you get attached to the higher, the highest being, Atman. Tattat prapya shubham na abhinandati na dveshti. He does not exult at obtaining good, nor does he get perturbed by evil. The world consists of pairs of opposites: comfort and discomfort at the physical realm, elation and desolation at the emotional level, credit and discredit at the intellectual plane. These are inherent in the world. What complicates it is that our system is full of desires. So, when something happens in the world that is in sync with our desires, we love it, like it, rejoice at it. When external happenings are not in consonance with our desires, we hate it. These fluctuations result in a roller coaster ride, which is sorrowful. So, how do we get that balance? When you rise above that level to a higher realm, even temporarily, if you are charged emotionally, you are freed from physical ups and downs. Suppose a member of your family has to undergo surgery. You take it upon yourself to take care of him or her. Your body gets fatigued, you are sleepy, but at that time, you do not even feel any of it. You can put in hours of grueling hard work and not feel the strain. You gain freedom from the pairs of opposites at the physical level because you have risen above them to the emotional realm. When you identify with the intellect, both physical and emotional fluctuations do not matter. To a scientist engrossed in research, mealtimes and anniversaries become unimportant. Ultimately, when you identify with Atman, you get total freedom from the fluctuations of the world. You have no interest in the inadequate, passing fancies of the world. It is the nostalgia of the infinite that beckons you. We all know that iron by itself is attracted to a magnet, while wood is not. However, when iron and wood are firmly bound together, they are attracted to the magnet. Does that mean that the wood is vulnerable to the influence of the magnet? No, the wood remains uninfluenced and pristine. Your personality is exactly like the wood iron combination. The wood symbolizes Atman, while the iron represents the body, mind, intellect. Matter influences matter. The magnetic force of the world is bound to affect the body, mind, and intellect. But matter cannot hold sway over spirit. Atman is ever free. However, you are so intricately woven with the matter layers that when the world influences them, you feel victimized. Thus, when the good and the evil of the world impact on the material components, you get afflicted and meekly submit to them. You lose the leverage and authority of Atman, your real self. When the body is ravaged by disease, you feel devastated. When fit, you feel fine. When the mind is hurt, you are sad. When loved, you are overjoyed. When the intellect is condemned, you are depressed. When admired, you are pleased. But even as you feel influenced, Atman, the real self, is untouched. The world does not have the power to influence Atman. All your problems stem from this bondage, attachment with the body, mind, and intellect. Shift your focus away from matter to the self in you, and you will remain unaffected through the oscillations of the world. This is what Krishna is saying in this verse. You must learn the art of withdrawing into the oasis of peace and tranquility in and through the fluctuations that the body, mind, and intellect go through. If you do that, you will remain samam, balanced. You will neither be elated nor get vexed. Yada samharate chayam कर्मोऽङ्गानीव सर्वशः इन्द्रियाणीन्द्रियार्थेभ्यः तस्य प्रज्ञा प्रतिष्ठिता. One is established in wisdom when one restrains one's sense organs from their sense objects, like the tortoise which pulls its limbs back from all sides. The verse answers the question, Kim Prabhasheta? How does he speak? Here, speech is used metonymically. A metonym is a way of indicating the whole by using a part. For instance, he uses speech prabhasheta to indicate all actions performed by the body. To convey it even more lucidly, he gives a metaphor. The tortoise is endowed with a hard shell and 6 appendages which protrude from under the crust. It moves using all its appendages. But faced with mortal danger, it retreats into its protective covering. Then it is safe. A realized person has been compared with the tortoise. He engages himself in the world using his 6 faculties, the 5 senses, and the mind. But as soon as he feels the lure of worldly temptations, he withdraws within, under the strong hold of the intellect. The tortoise's shell represents the realized person's intellect, which is fortified to withstand temptation. Just as the crust is always in contact with the sun above, the intellect of a realized soul is in constant communion with the sun above, Atman. It is this enlightened that protects him from the assault of the world. This is the description of the state of realization and also a useful tip we can employ to get there. You should contact the world freely with the senses and mind. However, the intellect should be strong, alert, and constantly exposed to the higher values of life, so that when temptation comes, your way you are able to withdraw the sense and mind under the secure protection of the intellect. If you do this, you will be protected from unnecessary detours in the world. However, this is not what people do. They either binge or completely withdraw from the world. Both are unhealthy. You should live life with confidence. This comes as a result of a strong intellect. Then you will be able to handle the temptations of the world. Even so, most people have one or two weaknesses. When you sense the likelihood of being swept away by your particular weakness, withdraw with the help of the intellect. If not, you will be in trouble. And all of us are in trouble because we do not apply this formula. So he does not say you should keep away from the world. He only says beware of your particular weaknesses. Vishaya vinivartante निराहारस्य देहिनः रसवर्जं रसोऽप्यस्य param drishtva nivartate. When one abstains, sense objects recede, but the fondness remains. The fondness goes only on seeing the Supreme. When a person makes up his mind and abstains from a particular enjoyment, the sense objects themselves seem to recede, but the preference for them remains. This fondness also goes when one realizes. Here again, he gives a valuable hint. If you want to control a weakness, as you make up your mind and exert your will, the object automatically turns away. An overweight person has a tremendous weakness for food, but when she is convinced that she needs to be healthy, the refrigerator shelves automatically empty. When a chain smoker decides to refrain from smoking, not only cigarettes, but even ashtrays and lighters seem to vanish from sight. However, the rasa of fondness does not go. It lingers until you reach the Supreme. The rasa vanishes completely only when you realize the Self. Realization is infinite happiness. Compared to the infinite, all finite entities lose their appeal. The message is that you have to be attentive and vigilant at all times. Till realization, the taste for sense enjoyment lingers. It can surface at any moment and take you away from the path. The story goes that Parvati wanted to marry Lord Shiva, the embodiment of asceticism. She asked for permission to serve him. Shiva accepted her services, but married her only after vanquishing Kamadeva, the god of love. Even Lord Shiva took adequate precaution, knowing the power of the senses. In contrast, the modern generation goes headlong into sense indulgence without any thought of inner fortification. यततो ह्यपि कौन्तेय पुरुषस्य विपश्चितः इन्द्रियाणि प्रमाथीनि हरन्ति प्रसभं मनः. The stormy senses violently drag the mind of even a constantly striving wise person, O Kaunteya, son of Kunti. Much emphasis is placed on sense control. People embark on the spiritual path with sincerity and commitment. But how many pay attention to sense control? How many people even understand what sense control is? Sense control is not denying yourself enjoyment of the senses, as is usually believed to be. You work hard to achieve success without paying attention to sense control. This makes you vulnerable to sense allurement. Then, even one moment of indiscretion washes away all your good work. Lack of control has led to the downfall of some of the greatest world leaders, sportspersons, and captains of industry. In Vivekachudamani, Adi Shankaracharya describes 5 different species that are destroyed by a weakness for one sense object. Then he observes that a human being has an appetite for all 5. How does he safeguard himself? The examples he gives are: a moth is attracted by sight, it goes around the dancing flame till it gets scorched to death. A deer is lured by sound, attracted by the drum beats, it comes out into the open and gets shot. A fish has weakness for taste, it bites the bait and gets killed. A bee is attracted by smell, it enters the flower, which closes in and destroys it. An elephant falls for touch. During the mating season, the elephant gets restless and falls in the trap. Even a person who has his intellect in place, who is continually working at strengthening it, even such a person's mind is carried away forcefully by the senses. The same thought is conveyed in the Manusmriti. It says, Balavan Indriyagramo Vidmasamapi Karshati. The group of senses is so powerful, it carries away even a wise person. The Puranas have various stories about how great sages fell prey to temptation when they were not alert. Bharata, the king sage, who had renounced his kingdom and the trappings of wealth to seek self realization, allowed his obsession for a deer to come in the way of his goal. Legend goes that Vishwamitra, one of the seven all time great among sages, was in deep meditation. Menaka, the celestial damsel, came down to dance before him, and Vishwamitra succumbed to her charms. If the likes of Bharata and Vishwamitra could fall from their exalted positions, what chance do we have? Yet we indulge in the world without any regard to strengthening the intellect, without reinforcing ourselves against the assault of these enticements. Sense objects and sense organs are inherently attracted to each other. The objects themselves are alluring, so the world tugs as to you from outside. In addition, there is a thrust from within towards the objects. Your sense organs are drawn towards them. Slick advertising has made the task of withstanding this dual force even more difficult. You attempt to control your diet, but as you step out, you see billboards advertising delicious food items. Pizza outlets say, buy one, get one free, and you yield. You go to a shop to buy one thing, but the display is so attractive that you buy a lot more than you had planned. To make matters worse, the credit card system fuels it with the slogan, buy now, pay later. There is a war going on between you and the world. The first line of defense on your side is the senses. The senses are first vanquished by the enemy. Next in line is the mind. In this verse, he says, the stormy senses drag the mind to the other side. In the following verses, he takes a conscious detour from the line of thinking to underscore the pivotal role of the intellect. And then in verse 67, he says that the mind, which was carried away by the senses, drags the intellect away. When your intellect goes, you are destroyed. The intellect is the last bastion to fall. Thus, you are in a precarious situation. Yet, there is an optimistic note in this verse. The human being is the only species with an intellect with which he can control the senses. So, the message here is fortify your intellect, reinforce it. If the intellect slips even momentarily, you are in grave danger of being swept away by the senses. As long as the intellect is in place, you are safe. Unfortunately, in this day and age, we concentrate on everything except the fortification of the intellect. तानि सर्वाणि संयम्य युक्त आसीत मत्परः वशे हि यस्येन्द्रियाणि तस्य prajna pratishthita. Restraining them all, one should sit absorbed in me, the highest. One whose senses are under control is indeed steadfast in wisdom. Here is the reference to meditation. Krishna always prefixes his statement on meditation with first control the senses. And yet, most of us, with scant respect for the caution that the Bhagavad Gita advocates, start meditating without exercising sense control. He says, meditate only after having controlled all the senses. If you do not restrain the senses, you cannot meditate. The mind is the instrument with which you meditate, so it has to be available to you. Today it is running all over the place because your senses are attracted by the sense objects. Krishna does not tell us how to control the senses in this verse. He only emphasizes the necessity for sense control. Fearing victimization, people on the spiritual path keep away from sense objects. This is hardly the solution. This is cowardice. Krishna says it is unseemly to behave thus. A person who contacts sense objects and yet retains mastery over them is a person of sense self-control. Samyamya means discipline or control. Sense enjoyment is not forbidden. It is an inherent aspect of human life. But if you allow it to carry on unsupervised, you will get destroyed. The famous picture of the horse chariot from the Kathopanishad conveys this idea. The five horses represents the senses, the reins are the mind, the charioteer is the intellect. When the charioteer is alert and skillful, the reins guide the horses in the direction determined by the charioteer. Thus he reaches his destination. If the charioteer lacks the requisite skills and is not on guard, the reins are loose, the horses go whichever way they please, and the chariot crashes. Similarly, when the intellect is sharp and suitably fortified, the mind and senses are guided properly towards your goal. When the intellect is undeveloped and is not vigilant, the mind fails to rein in the senses, which fall for their respective sense organs. Thus, you fail materially as well as spiritually. A realized person is one whose senses are under control. This is the first step towards spiritual development. Having achieved this, sit absorbed in me, Atman. This is a passing reference to meditation. A controlled person's mind is by nature calm and contemplative. It is in meditative mode. Only then can you meditate. In meditation, the intellect directs the mind to one thought without allowing it to meander into any other thought. When a seeker meditates, thus even the last thought is removed, leading to realization. The next two verses together tell us what happens if we do not control the senses. ध्यायतो विषयान् पुंसः सङ्गस्तेषुपजायते सङ्गात् सञ्जायते कामः कामात् क्रोधोऽभिजायते क्रोधात् भवति सम्मोहः सम्मोहात् स्मृतिविभ्रमः स्मृतिभंशात् बुद्धिनाशो बुद्धिनाशात् प्रणश्यति. Pondering over objects, one gets attached to them. Attachment breeds desire. From desire, anger is born. Anger leads to delusion. From delusion, memory gets clouded. From clouding of memory, the intellect gets destroyed. When the intellect gets destroyed, one is ruined. When the intellect is not deployed, you go down the stairway to destruction. One thing leads to another, and before you know, ruin stares you in the face. Only the intellect safeguards you from this predicament. It begins with a casual thought, and if you allow the thought to continue, it gathers momentum. You hear of a new car. You invest in the thought till you want to test drive it. This is called attachment. Then you want to buy the car. The attachment further takes shape as desire. So first you are drawn by it, then you desire it. Anger is an aberration of desire. When an extraneous element comes in the way of your desire being fulfilled, you get angry at the disruptive element. If the loan for the car is not approved, you get angry with the agent who has denied it. When you are angry, you get deluded. A teenager gets angry when his father says things he should not say. The father also gets angry, leading to a chaotic situation. Psychologists refer to anger as temporary madness. If even one member keeps his head on his shoulders, such a condition is averted. Delusion leads to the clouding of memory. In the heat of the moment, son and father forget their relationship. Son forgets to show respect. Father forgets to show understanding. When memory gets clouded, your intellect bites the dust. The emotion builds up to such an extent that you lose the capacity to think. This destroys you. Thus, step by step, one thought snowballs into self-annihilation. Stairway to destruction. Thought leading to attachment, leading to desire, leading to anger, leading to delusion, leading to loss of memory, leading to loss of intellect, leading to total destruction. It is not physical prowess that made the human being the ruler of the universe, but the capacity of the intellect to think. This is what has put him in a commanding position. Otherwise, physically, he is no match for the animal kingdom. The intellect must be closely guarded, protected, developed. We must understand how vulnerable we are to destruction. And it all starts with one thought. Before we know, we have gone through the whole process onto total destruction. We must think through to the consequences of our actions. Suppose your friends plan a holiday to an exotic location. They invite you to join them. You are tempted, but the intellect should immediately come into play and consider the constraints. You may not be able to afford the trip. You may also have stiff deadlines to meet. You should press the delete button on the thought because it is not possible for you to act on it at this point in time. However, if a thought is practical or in your interest to pursue, by all means encourage it. If you feel you should study the Bhagavad Gita, do not dismiss the thought, but examine every thought at the very first stage. When one pathogenic, disease-causing bacterium enters your system, you do not notice it. You feel fine. Having firmly ensconced itself in your body, it starts multiplying. Initially, you show no signs of discomfort, but the bacteria multiply at such a rate that one fine day you are hit. Then you are laid up for a number of days, even if it is a minor infection. What is a bacterium? What is its power? What sophistication does a bacterium have compared to a human being? Yet, that microscopic being can debilitate you. Similarly, you entertain thoughts at random, not knowing their power. You feel, what can that one thought do? But the thought takes root in your system and can destroy you. Therefore, what you need in spirituality is a thought scanner. You need to scan every thought that enters your mind. If you do that, you will be fine. If not, it will be very difficult to control the force of your thought. Imagine a car on a steep incline. When it starts rolling down gently, it is possible to apply brakes and stop it. But as the car gains momentum, the brakes become more and more ineffective in halting the vehicle, and it eventually crashes. Thoughts come into your mind at such a terrific pace that most of the time you're not even aware of the kind of thoughts you are entertaining. And what is even more dangerous is that you are entertaining negative thoughts. As an American activist said to his son, a person may have done many injustices to you, but never ever entertain hatred towards him. The bitterness may or may not do him any harm, but it will surely destroy you. Thinking negatively can only lead to negative results for you. The other person may be blissfully unaware of what is happening in your mind. Therefore, you must be extra alert to make sure that you harbor the right kind of thoughts. When you entertain thoughts which are detrimental to your well being, you should be able to arrest them. These two verses highlight the importance of the intellect in controlling such thought patterns. रागद्वेषविमुक्तैस्तु विषयानिन्द्रियैश्चरन् आत्मवश्यैर्विधेयात्मा प्रसादमिदगच्छति. But the self-restrained one who has gained self-mastery becomes serene, free from attraction and aversion. Such a one moves amidst sense objects. Here, Krishna gives the technique of sense control. Why is he asking you to control the senses? Because when you function without control, you accumulate desires. This takes you further away from the goal of realization, and ironically, desires interfere even with material success. Intemperate indulgence in the senses detracts from the goal. The technique of sense control has two distinct parts, as implied by the two words. Atmavasya, one who is self-controlled, and Videyatma, one who has achieved self-mastery. Videyatma is also a name of Lord Vishnu, and Krishna is an incarnation of Vishnu. So, part one, the intellect screens the thoughts in the mind so that no interaction with the senses gets ungoverned. This is in turn achieved in two ways. Every one of us has inherent desires, attraction, and repulsion towards objects. You are born with some and during your lifetime and cultivate many more. When the intellect gets marginalized and the mind takes over your activity, you lose control. To become a controlled person, you should ensure that the attractions and aversions do not directly fuel action. Attractions and aversions should be scanned by the intellect and acted upon only if the intellect authorizes it. This does not mean that you should deny yourself everything you like and opt for all the things you dislike. That would be frustrating. In fact, the intellect may allow many of your likes. There would be only a few things that the intellect would disallow because they are detrimental to you. In such cases, abide by the intellect. Fresh contact with a sense object should not create a new wave of desire in your system. The Prashnopanishad explains the phenomenon of sense perception. Your mind makes contact with the world of sense objects through the five sense organs. Only then do you enjoy the experience. If the mind does not support the perception, it will not register it. In other words, you do not enjoy it. A busy, stressed out executive goes home and finds a delectable meal spread before him. But since his mind is on problems at work, he eats the meal without enjoying it. The Gita does not debar enjoyment. It only cautions against stirring up action replays in the mind before the experience is over and after the experience. Do not let the mind loiter in bygone enjoyments. If you tarry there, you create a new wave of desire. Moreover, when the body moves to the next experience, you are not able to enjoy the new contact. The mind is still savoring the thought of the previous experience. Let the enjoyment go on, but do not persist in its thought. Linger, and you will languish. All the while, the mind is engaged in past revelry, and at no point of time are you enjoying the present experience. So, the Bhagavad Gita, in advocating sense control, is giving back the enjoyment you have lost. Evoking past enjoyments is like chewing the cud. When cattle return to their sheds after grazing all day, they regurgitate their food and chew it again. In the same manner, you enjoy many experiences during the day. Later, you revive those enjoyments in your mind. Krishna recommends a formula by which you enjoy each moment to the fullest without adding to your burden of desires. So, the part one, the intellect is used to prevent existing attractions and aversions from directly fueling actions, fresh experiences from sparking off a new trajectory of craving. Part 2. As long as you value sense enjoyment, you can never really control the senses. What is required then is growth to a higher dimension. A lofty goal makes it easier for the intellect to control the senses. The person who has just embarked on the spiritual journey still has desires for sense enjoyment. He is vulnerable to the lure of the senses, but he has also been introduced to higher values and understands there are far more significant things in life to aspire for. He is determined not to allow his weaknesses for the senses to come in the way of his achieving the higher. So he restricts sense contact to enable him to pursue his goal. Corporate executives may refrain from drinking during the week to focus on work, but give vent to their penchant for alcohol over the weekend. Sportspersons are careful about their diet while preparing for a big event, but they allow themselves a treat when the event is over. Spiritual aspirants restrict sense enjoyment to the extent necessary, but incorporate moments of enjoyment in their discipline. In this intermediate phase, a certain degree of physical abstinence is required until you establish yourself at the higher level. Once you are secure in the higher, the temptation itself ceases. The lower no longer attracts the mind, just as an adult is no longer tempted by toys. However, when the occasion arises, he can engage in a game of Scrabble with his child or play hearts on his laptop while waiting to board a flight. He is in full control because his mind is not hankering after the game. It is absorbed in higher aspirations. At this stage, sense control comes as a result of wisdom. The corporate executive, who earlier had a weakness for alcohol, finds fulfillment in more exciting things. The sportsperson values health so much that the taste for unhealthy indulgence vanishes. The spiritual aspirant has transcended his physical desires and is enjoying far more satisfying pursuits. He is convinced that everything in the world is fragile and precarious. He has access to that which is permanent, unchanging. Now, any amount of sense contact fails to shake him from his exalted state. This concept has been illustrated in the personalities of Krishna and Durvasa. Krishna was called a Nitya Brahmachari, meaning eternal celibate, yet he had 16,000 wives. Durvasa was called Nitya Upavasi, one who always fasts, but he consumed large amounts of food. Hence, control has no reference to the amount of contact with the sense object. Control only means intellectual governance. Never should you allow even one thought to go to the sense object without the specific approval of the intellect. Humanity, in its infancy, when it revels in bhoga, sense enjoyment, you achieve sense control when there is a paradigm shift from bhoga to yoga, higher levels of enjoyment culminating in Atman. If you do not rise from bhoga to yoga, you will be afflicted by roga, disease at body level and disease at mind level. Moreover, you will not be able to effectively control the senses. Yoga is achieved when you escalate from Visay- Visayananda, sense enjoyment, through Bhajananda, emotional and intellectual delights, to Brahmananda, spiritual ecstasy. As you rise to the emotional and intellectual planes, sense enjoyment loses its charm. The senses no longer have a hold on you. Thus, control becomes easy. Finally, when you access the infinite joy of the spirit, even emotional and intellectual delights become meaningless. Nothing in the world tempts you. The mind becomes free to focus on the goal of realization. Thus, in summary, the two methods to control are: Part 1, use your intellect to supervise and guide sense contact. Part 2, escalate to higher realms of enjoyment, as a result of which the lower no longer tempts you. The result of leading a life of self control is peace, that elusive sense of serenity. This is depicted by the sweet prasada distributed after a puja or spiritual worship. People have not been educated on subtler levels of gratification. Sense enjoyment is all they know. Thus, the senses are powerful and the intellect is weak. The sensory system holds sway over the intellect. As a result, you fall for every passing fancy, and the battle with the senses is lost. Hence, the whole world is in a state of disquiet and disturbance. Internal strife manifests as external conflict between people, communities, and nations. Peace is the need of the hour, and it can come only through self control. Thus, development of the intellect is of paramount importance. प्रसादे सर्वदुःखानां हानिरस्योपजायते प्रसन्नचेतसो ह्याशु बुद्धिः पर्यवतिष्ठते. All sorrows end in serenity. The serene one's intellect is soon steadied. In this verse, in the previous verse, he gave us the formula for self control. Once the intellect governs the impulses of the mind by default, all your actions become benign. When attractions and aversions drive activities, the actions turn malignant. And your mind should not regurgitate and dwell on the enjoyment after the contact with the object ceases. Lastly, when you grow to access higher planes of happiness, the senses lose their charm. They no longer interfere with the pursuit of the divine. And Krishna says, one who has controlled the senses achieves peace. In this verse, he says, all your sorrows are destroyed in that peace which you have obtained as a result of practicing self control. In a peaceful, tranquil mind, the intellect becomes sharp. Even sportspersons accept that they achieve peak performance only when their mind is relaxed. Athletes acknowledge that among the finalists, the differences between them is minimal. The mind determines whether you win or lose. You gain clarity of thinking only with a relaxed mind. You become efficient, successful, and prosperous. When you control the senses, you become successful as well as happy. These two attributes are almost always mutually exclusive. A person who achieves success seems to lose happiness, and success eludes a happy person. But you want a combination of both. You achieve that amalgam through the Gita. So the endeavor should be to have a peaceful mind and a focused intellect. If you have these two, you achieve both material and spiritual excellence. External enrichment is possible only when the mind is enriched. नास्ति बुद्धिरयुक्तस्य न चायुक्तस्य भावना न चाभावयतः शान्तिः शान्तस्य कुतः सुखम्. The ayukta, disunited, has neither intellect nor bhavana, contemplation. And without bhavana, there can be no peace. How will there be happiness for the one without peace? The verse starts by saying that there is no intellect for the ayukta, one who is not yoked to a higher ideal, the highest being Atman. The higher the goal to which one is aligned, the greater the serenity and stronger the intellect. When you have fixed a goal, the intellect guides your actions towards it and weeds out anything that thwarts the pursuit of your goal. The discipline calms the mind and makes it contemplative. Only a calm mind can perceive the play of divinity in the world. When you are disturbed, you are unable to see the splendor of nature. Bhavana means opening your mind to the divine. You are in a prison of your own making. In a prison, the convict has no freedom to choose when to eat, what to wear, or what to do. Everything is decided by the prison authorities. Similarly, in life, you are forced to dance to the tune of the body, mind, and intellect. Your entire life is consumed in catering to their demands. You have no choice to act independently. A wise prisoner conducts himself such that he gets released as soon as possible, preferably on parole. He has no interest in the prison activities. His real life is out there in the world. When you become aware of your plight in the prison of life, you lose interest in the happenings of the world. You understand your real life lies beyond it all. This is only your real life. Liberation becomes your goal. Every activity is then dedicated to obtaining release from the self imposed sentence, and the Gita promises instant parole, here and now. Your intellect is focused on freedom, and your mind is devoted to that goal. The combination of intellectual focus and devotion brings about saturation of thought. This culminates in crystallization, realization. Just as crystals form when a solution of copper sulfate is saturated, when the mind and intellect are converged on the goal of realization, there is a sudden leap of consciousness, and the solution to the mystery of life unfolds before you. Without this process of saturation and crystallization, there can be no peace, and one who is not at peace cannot be happy. If we go back to verse 60, he says, the senses carry away the mind. In verse 61, he says, restrain the senses first. In verse 62 and 63, he gives the stairway to destruction. When the intellect is not alert, one thought is enough to destroy you. Just as when your immune system is not strong, one bacterium is enough to cause infection. In verse 64, he gives the prescription for self-control, and if you follow it, you get peace. In verse 65, he says that peace leads to a sharp intellect. Here he says, without control, there is neither peace nor happiness. He deviates in verses 61 to 66 to explain the importance of the intellect. In 67, he connects with verse 60 and says that the mind, which has been dragged by the senses, waylays the intellect. Indriyanan hi charatam yanmanonuvidhiyate tadasya harati prajnam vayurnavamivambasi. Following the restive senses, the mind pulls one's discrimination away, as the wind pulls away a boat in water. Here he uses a famous metaphor used in the scriptures to represent a human being's journey from the shore of mortality to that of immortality. The comparisons are as follows. The boat, the individual journeying through life. Ocean, the world with its ups and downs, just as the ocean is characterized by waves. Wind, stormy cravings of the mind. Captain, the intellect, buddhi. The intellect steers you through the challenges of life, like the captain who guides the boat through the choppy sea. Compass, the conscience, subtle intellect. The compass always points north. Similarly, the conscience always points towards the higher Atman. Be it a sage or a criminal, everyone has a conscience. When you are inundated with desires, the voice of conscience gets drowned. Harbor, if you follow the conscience, you reach the harbor. The peace that comes when you dedicatedly follow your course. Other shore, the shore of immortality. The metaphor fits perfectly. When there is a gale, the ocean is turbulent and the boat capsizes. The same thing happens to you when you unintelligently allow the passions of your mind to take over your personality. You entertain a thought here, fall for a desire there, and it seems harmless if you continue in the same manner. It overturns your personality. But a strong intellect guided by the conscience steers you through the challenges of life, and you reach the harbor of peace. With a peaceful mind, you meditate. Meditation removes the last traces of thought, and you reach the shore of realization. This is the purpose of our existence. All of us are born in the world only to reach this destination. So the choice is yours. Do you want to be tossed and turned by the waves of life and get shipwrecked like so many others? Or do you want to follow the intellect, ride smoothly through life, and get to the other shore? You can pursue your profession, you can have a family, you can enjoy life, but in and through all this, there must be this focus. Why am I born in this world? What is my mission? My raison d'etre? It is not just to live a mechanical life. What are you, a human being, for? As the scripture says, the sole purpose of human existence is to reach God. When you embark upon this journey, there will be challenges and hindrances. You must overcome them and pursue the goal with sincerity and dedication. Give your mind a higher mission, a nobler goal. When you are inspired with the higher, the mind automatically refrains from sense indulgence. It is not possible to control the senses by merely denying yourself. It is necessary to substitute the baser desires with a higher one. तस्माद्यस्य महाबाहो निग्रहीतानि सर्वशः इन्द्रियाणीन्द्रियार्थेभ्यः तस्य प्रज्ञा प्रतिष्ठिता. Therefore, one is established in wisdom when one's senses are wholly withdrawn from sense objects. O Mahabaho, mighty armed one. He calls Arjuna Mahabaho, meaning mighty armed one, because he was a warrior renowned for his exceptional courage and bravery. He had emerged victorious in many battles. He was a man of the world with the skill and expertise to conquer it. Krishna suggests external victories are meaningless unless you conquer the inner kingdom. Arjuna, who was well qualified to tackle external challenges, failed in the conquest of his inner self. Like Arjuna, you are competent enough to conquer the challenges that are outside of you, but you lack the knowledge and expertise to conquer your inner self. Unless you do this, you cannot succeed in life. If you do not fortify yourself with this knowledge, sooner or later you will be in Arjuna's condition, crestfallen, unable to face adversity. Therefore, Krishna recommends that you put in a little effort at strengthening your inner personality alongside external triumphs. A perfect person is one whose senses are wholly withdrawn from sense objects. All the senses have to be controlled. Most people are vulnerable to one or two senses. It is these weak spots that need to be plugged. A person who has a weakness for food may be surprisingly disciplined in other areas. Another may have a controlled diet but succumb to the lure of TV. Perfection means control of all the senses. One weakness is enough to drain all your inner resources. Therefore, you should have an overall perspective and safeguard yourself in all areas. No other species needs to exercise control. They have an inbuilt discipline that governs their actions. It is the human being alone who needs to control himself because he has freedom of choice. In today's world, people have a great deal of freedom, but the requisite discipline and intellectual strength is lacking. They are beset with all kinds of problems and cannot enjoy that freedom. Science and technology have taken great strides in improving the world, yet in this world which offers enhanced enjoyment, the human being's happiness has dwindled. In spite of the vastly better world around him, he is unable to enjoy it. The Bhagavad Gita restores that enjoyment, offers permanent happiness.
या निशा सर्वभूतानां तस्यां जागर्ति संयमी यस्यां जागृति भूतानि सा निशा पश्यतो मुनेः. The self-controlled one awakes in that which is night to all beings. That in which all beings are awake is night to the seer, the Muni, or the sage. In this verse, Krishna makes an interesting observation. The world being the same, the realized person's experience is totally different from that of the common man. You experience finitude and get crushed by the wheels of change. Everything in the world perishes. In the same world, a realized person sees infinity. He sees the changeless foundation behind all the changes that are taking place. His focus is on the imperishable. There are two completely opposite experiences, like day and night. Night signifies ignorance. You are unaware of infinity, but very much tuned to the finite things of the world. You experience limitation because of your identification with the body, mind, and intellect, which are limited. The mighty sun above has many reflections. Reflected suns appear wherever reflecting surfaces are present. The mirrored sun assumes the properties of the reflecting surface and loses its original qualities. When the sun is reflected in a drop of rain, it becomes minuscule. When reflected in a frozen lake, it is cold. Similarly, you are that infinite, all pervading force Atman. A reflected self appears wherever there is a body, mind, and intellect. That reflected self loses its infinity and takes on the properties of the body, mind, and intellect. This is what causes all the problems. You see limitations, you see finitude, because your attention is on the reflected self. A realized person sees a completely different picture. He sees the original Atman divested of the distortions of the body, mind, and intellect. This concept applies even in the relative sense. The contemplative one goes to bed early and is an early riser. The sensual one is awake through the night and sleeps till late in the day. A spiritual person has a positive attitude in life. A sensualist is negative and agitated. An inward looking person is an optimist, seeing the brighter side of life. A worldly person is a pessimist, seeing only the negatives in life. A spiritual person is invariably a giver. A materialist is a taker. आपूर्यमानम् अचलप्रतिष्ठम् समुद्रमापः प्रविशन्ति यद्वत् तद्वत् कामायं प्रविशन्ति सर्वे स शान्तिमाप्नोति न कामकामी. As the ocean, which filled from all sides with waters entering it, remains still, so one in whom all objects of desire enters obtains peace, not the desirer of desires. This verse is extracted from the Mundaka Upanishad. The Upanishad says, as rivers flowing disappear in the ocean, losing name and form, the wise one, free from name and form, attains the effulgent Purusha. It gives the example of rivers entering the ocean. Each river is distinct and different from the other. But the moment they enter the ocean, they lose their individual properties and become one with the ocean. Krishna compares the ocean with the state of realization. When a person realizes the self, the objects and beings of the world enter him, but they do not make any difference to him. Just as when millions of gallons of water from the rivers enter the ocean, it does not make any difference to the ocean. The salinity does not decrease. The composition of the ocean does not change. It remains the same because the ocean is vast. The Sthita Prajna has reached the state of infinite happiness. All of us are chasing happiness, and yet nobody seems to know where it lies or how to get it. The Gita gives us a formula for happiness. The formula, as enunciated in Gita Rahasya, is happiness is equal to number of desires actualized divided by the number of desires harbored. If you want to increase the quotient, you must either increase the numerator or decrease the denominator. Preferably both. You go all out to increase the numerator, believing it will enhance your happiness. But are you achieving it? When one desire gets fulfilled, you are happy for a while, but simultaneously, without your realizing it, the denominator also increases. As a result, your happiness actually reduces. Everywhere you find attractive shop displays, products are being advertised aggressively, stoking the fires of desire. As a result, you fulfill a few desires and the numerator increases a bit, but the denominator increases at a faster rate. Thus, your happiness is constantly diminishing. A lady wants new curtains for her living room. She gets them only to discover that the upholstery doesn't match with the curtains. So she reupholsters the living room furniture. But then the walls look old in comparison. So she decides to paint the room. But now she has to paint the whole house. Thus, one thing leads to another, and at the end of it, all she finds her savings significantly depleted. She began by fulfilling one desire, but that one desire led to the cultivation of numerous other desires. So, if you want your happiness to increase, what you need to do is just deal with the denominator, that is, the number of desires harbored. The numerator is not really relevant. The numerator is the number of desires actualized. If you increase the number of desires actualized, your happiness will increase. But any increase in the denominator, that is the number of desires harbored, will negate it. Beside, however much you increase the numerator, you can never get infinite happiness. On the other hand, if you reduce the number of desires harbored, your happiness increases by leaps and bounds. And if you are able to bring it down to zero, you can achieve infinite happiness. That is exactly what you are looking for. The spiritual path is designed to get you to that infinite happiness. Once you attain infinity, anything that is added on does not make any difference. This is true even mathematically. Anything added or subtracted from infinity still gives infinity. One is one in whom all objects of desire enter attains peace, not the desirer of the object. The person who deals with the denominator achieves peace, not the person who is working on the numerator. You may or may not fulfill your desires, but there must be some program to deal with the denominator if you are serious about attaining happiness. Otherwise, you will be stuck with a whole lot of desires and you won't know how to manage them. विहाय कामान्यः सर्वान् पुमांश्च विहाय कामान्य सर्वान् पुमान् चरति निःस्पृहः विहाय कामान्यः सर्वान् पुमान् चरति निःस्पृहः विहाय कामान्यः सर्वान् पुमांश्चरति निःस्पृहः निर्ममो निरहङ्कारः स शान्तिमधिगच्छति. That person attains peace who, relinquishing all desires, lives without longing, mindness, or egoism. In verses 69 to 70, Krishna gives a recap of his answer. Arjuna's question in verse 54 is, who is a perfect person and what is his description? In verse 55, Krishna defines the realized person, one who has totally abandoned all desires from the mind and is fulfilled in the self by the self. In verse 70, he explains the concept further. Here he asserts that only the person who has renounced desire attains peace. The problem with us is not in the possession of external objects. The problem is with the multiplication of desires in the mind. As long as you have a desire, you become dependent. You become a slave, a beggar to the object of desire. This is an unintelligent thing to do. So, have the object, but not the desire. You can have the world at your feet, but never should you crave for or hanker after anything. And we have already seen how to relinquish desire, escalate to the higher desire, and the lower one drops. From infancy to adulthood, this escalation is natural. But having reached adulthood, you need to put in effort to move to spiritual adulthood, which is the state of realization. In order to grow to that stage, you need knowledge of the higher. Once you gain knowledge of the higher, the lower desires automatically drop. There is a story of a neighboring country in which there was a revolution and the royal family had to seek refuge in India. When the situation improved, the king, the queen, and the courtiers returned, leaving the infant prince in the safe hands of their trusted governess in Mumbai. They told her not to tell anyone that he was the prince, not even the little hare himself. Soon thereafter, the entire royal family was put to death. The prince was the only surviving member, the heir to the throne. There was anarchy in the state for several years. When peace returned, the loyal subjects wanted their king back. They sent their representatives all over Mumbai to look for the prince. The prince and his governess were living in the streets in abject poverty. The prince was a beggar. He would get alms one day and celebrate and get nothing the next day and be dejected. This was his life. One day he encountered the royal entourage. There was speaking in a strange language which he had heard his governess speak. So he ran and called her out. She realized that they were the courtiers in search of the prince and was ecstatic. However, due to security reasons, she did not divulge the truth to the prince. She only said they were friends and had invited them to their hometown. On arrival in their city, they told the prince the whole truth. Initially, he was uncomfortable in his new role and wanted to return to Mumbai. But gradually he got used to it and soon became a good king. A few years later, he came to India on a state visit. One day in Mumbai, he dodged his security personnel, wore his beggar's attire, and went to the same area where he used to beg until recently. Some people gave him alms, others didn't. What is the difference between his experiences now and earlier? He is the king now, but he was king even then. Then what has contributed to his newfound freedom? Until a few years ago, even though he was the king, he did not know he was king. It is the ignorance of his kingship that made him a victim of circumstance. When somebody was good to him, he was thrilled. If somebody was unpleasant, he was dejected. He went through the ups and downs of life because he did not know he was king. Now he's going through the same experiences, but he's enjoying every moment of the few hours as a beggar because he now knows he is king. So all you have to do is understand who you really are. Once you understand that you are a king, Atman, you remain unaffected through the highs and lows, the achievements and the setbacks of life. You retain the equanimity. and exhilaration of kingship through all your experiences. So, knowledge is the key. Knowledge of yourself, not of the Gita or the scriptures. In Atma Bodha, Sankaracharya says, of all spiritual disciplines, knowledge of self is the direct means to liberation. Once you know your true identity, you live in the world in a totally different manner, detached, unaffected, and blissful. एषा ब्राह्मी स्थितिः पार्थ नैनां प्राप्य विमुह्यति स्थित्वा स्यामन्तकालेऽपि ब्रह्मनिर्वाणमृच्छति. O Partha, this is the nature of Brahman. Having attained this, nobody is deluded. Remaining in it, one attains nirvana, union with Brahman, even after death. In this verse, he beautifully encapsulates the entire 19 verses. He endorses the concept of Jivan Mukti, which means you can gain the stage of realization even here while living in the world. There is another concept called Videha Mukti, which says that you have to physically die to get to the state of realization. Throughout the Gita, Krishna says you can get it here and now. He does not promise a speculative post mortem paradise. All you have to do is want it. Then you put in efforts to get it. You might wonder, having reached some level of spiritual development, and what happens when you die? The Gita says, having got it, there is no return. In the material world, you work to make money, but you might lose it. Or a person aspires for and attains social status, but one slip and it is gone. You tend to believe that same thing will happen in the spiritual field. But spiritual assets, once obtained, never go. Your spiritual stock only appreciates, no loss, only gain. Krishna gives us this assurance. He says, even at the end of life, one does not lose the state of nirvana, union with Brahman. It continues even after death. This is not true of any other achievement. How futile it is to pursue material ends. With the death of the body, all is lost. You cannot take your assets with you. You cannot take your home or even your family with you. You cannot access your worldly knowledge after death. The only thing you carry along is your spiritual status, the level and quality of your mind and intellect. So it would be wise to invest a little time and effort in safeguarding your future interest. Inherent in the description of a person of realization is the path to get there. Thus, we have a clear goal to aspire for and a method by which to get there. As Indians, this knowledge is our inheritance, it is our wealth. If we are able to make use of it, bring it out of the books and into our lives, we can work miracles in the world, not only for ourselves but also for humanity at large. Right through history, this country has been a beacon light for humanity. The unfortunate part is that we are not making use of it. So, the appeal here by Krishna is use this knowledge, develop yourself, become a Sthita Prajna, a perfect person. Om Tat Saditi Srimad-Bhagavad-Gita-su-Panishatsu Brahma-Vidyayam Yoga-Shastre Shri-Krishna-Arjuna-Sambhade Sankhya-Yogo Nama-Dvitiyo-Dhyayah. Om. That is the truth. Thus, in the Upanishads, in the glorious Bhagavad Gita, in the knowledge of Brahman, in the scripture of yoga, in the dialogue between Sri Krishna and Arjuna, the second chapter entitled The Yoga of Wisdom ends.